Hello, everyone. It is noon, so I will pass it off to Evelyn Nelson to get us started today.
Super. Thanks, Christy. Great to see lots of returning faces and new faces to our Keeping Kids Safe Echo. I just wanted to start off with a couple of house cleaning items. Just some reminders that this session's being recorded and that it'll be shared back with you at the end of the session. We ask that we keep your microphones muted, but please do unmute or use the chat as you have questions and suggestions. We really appreciate when you are able to keep your cameras on. We know folks may also be eating their lunches, which is a-okay, but it really helps us develop that community of learning when folks are able to join us on screen. It looks like many of you have already typed in your names, which we really super appreciate. That really helps us as we get the certificates back. We're able to share your certificates of attendance when you've typed in your names. Just a final reminder too, we're fortunate, we appreciate Telehealth ROCKS, which is our grant-funded program that focuses on school-based behavioral health, is helping support the Keeping Kids Safe Echo. We're glad you're here, and we look forward again to your questions and comments throughout. That being said, I want to jump to our introductions of our presenter today. So we're fortunate to have Monica Kurtz, the Director of Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters, as well as Meg Hasselman, the Program Coordinator for Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters. Just again, a few reminders. We don't have any financial disclosures with this ECHO. And we're presenting the best information that we know today. That information may change over time. So just remembering that we're sharing the best that we know at this point in time. After the session, you'll receive the slides and recording, your certificates of attendance, and then please do keep in touch both during the session and in between sessions. We'd love to hear from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meg Hasselman. If any of you signed on to witness Monica Kurtz in action, you will be very disappointed to know she will not be here today. We had Monica listed as backup for me. Full disclosure, my sister is having a baby today, and so we weren't sure if it was going to be me or Monica, but alas, timing has worked out. So I'm really excited to be with you all. Super excited to share about some ways to build resilient students and communities. Based off of the feedback that you all provided, we knew that this was an important topic for you all to get involved in. I always want to start by saying I am not the only expert in the room. I know that you all come with your own experiences and wisdom, and we really, really want to hear from you all. So you might pick up that I'm a very casual person and presenter. I very much prefer people to interact and be engaged. So if you have something you'd like to add and you're comfortable, you are welcome to unmute and ask questions or provide perspective or whatever that looks like, but you're also welcome to engage in the chat. I am not going to be keeping the chat up because I am way too easily distracted and want to hear and see all of the really wonderful things you all are sharing in the chat. So thanks, Melissa, for helping me keep track of everything there. Some of you may have been here last time and kind of heard about what Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters does in Kansas, but for those of you who don't know, I did want to provide some context. So Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters has been around for about 53 years. We started as a drop-in crisis center and sort of in the early 2000s, we transitioned to focusing primarily on suicide prevention. And we do also provide support in other areas of crisis as well. So we have 2 departments in our agency that do programming. And the first is the Resource Center, which is the department that I work for. So we do policy and advocacy locally and statewide. We do provide prevention and intervention, education and technical assistance in post-vention response. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all of that means going forward. And then we also work with agencies and schools, organizations to provide consultation for policy development surrounding safer suicide care. And then we have Headquarters Counseling Center. So we answer the 988 crisis contact or suicide and crisis lifeline for all of Kansas. We do that via calls and texts, and we also answer crisis chats. We're the only center in Kansas to answer for all 105 counties. We do have some folks who answer in Johnson County through Johnson County Mental Health, and Sedgwick County's ComCare, they answer for those counties, and then we take any rollover calls. And then we also have a therapy clinic that's run by graduate student interns, where we work with folks who are experiencing a multitude of issues, including chronic suicidality. So we have our hands in a lot of different pots in the suicide prevention and crisis world. So hopefully this session today provides some perspective and new information. And again, please feel free to share anything that I may miss. All right. So to give some context to this conversation, I think it's really important in order for us to talk about building resilience in kids and communities, to talk about the whole prevention picture. We know that resilience is something that can be learned and practiced. In the earlier introduction we have to certain prevention techniques and efforts, the better equipped folks are going to be in the long run in how they mitigate or navigate crisis situations or mental health issues. So we have primary prevention, which is what we consider to be upstream prevention. This is where we look at root causes of certain public health issues and challenges, and then we work to strengthen and build protective communities and individuals, and we do that in a number of ways, which we'll expand upon really going forward in this presentation. That's going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. But to fully understand where and how primary prevention fits in, we're going to talk about the whole picture of prevention. So we have then secondary prevention, which you could think about this as midstream prevention. So this is where you might see gatekeeper trainings, providing response to behavioral health challenges or suicide crises, and it helps individuals avoid further harm. So maybe they're in the midst of a crisis or experiencing some sort of challenge, and this type of prevention really helps to avoid making that situation worse or deepening any sort of crisis that may be happening. And then we have tertiary prevention, which we can also consider post-vention. So this is support that's provided to individuals who've experienced a suicide loss or folks who have attempted suicide. And it's where we really are able to determine or detect risk in other folks surrounding that person who died or attempted suicide. You can go ahead and advance. So this is just another way to sort of think about those 3 areas of prevention. So in this model, it's showing prevention, intervention, and postvention. And the reason I really like this kind of wheel is because it really demonstrates that prevention, intervention, and postvention act as one effort under the suicide prevention umbrella, or I guess this is the umbrella rather, right? And so the reason that it acts as a wheel is because we know that when, for instance, if we're providing postvention support in a school after a suicide death or after a suicide attempt, it gives the opportunity for professionals or other school staff to be able to identify other students or staff who may be impacted by that loss or by that attempt. And, we're able to sort of detect, is this person at risk, and what can we do to intervene, right? And then ultimately we're preventing further suicides from happening or further risk from occurring. Does that make sense of how that all plays in together? Okay. Beautiful. All right, so in the prevention world, some of you may be familiar with this story, and I'm still going to share it anyway, because I think it can be a really good reminder of why we focus upstream, and really what upstream prevention is. It's a nice demonstration of why we focus early on rather than solely focusing on the intervention or postvention piece. So the story goes like this. There's a woman who lives in a village, and the village is situated near a river, and that river leads to a waterfall. And every morning she takes a walk next to this river, and she just really enjoys taking in the sights and the sounds of nature, right? And then one morning she's on this walk and she hears some shouting from the river. And she's looking around trying to figure out what's happening, and she sees someone in the water. And so she does what any of us would do, right? She jumps into action, she dives into the water, and she pulls this person to safety. And she goes back to her town and she's sharing what happened, and everyone's celebrating and calling her a hero, and wants to really make sure that she feels good about the life that she saved, because she should, right? So the next morning she heads out again on her morning walk, and again she hears shouting from the river. So she jumps in, she starts to pull this person to safety, but before she can get to the bank to bring this person to safety, she hears another shout. And so she's trying to get this person to safety while also thinking about the other person that she hears shouting. And so she's pulling these people to safety, and she keeps hearing shouts happen. Once she gets this situation under control, she goes back to the town and she says, we need to really prepare for this, right? So many people are in this river, and we need to figure out how to keep them, or how to pull them to safety quicker. So they do a lot of brainstorming. They decide they're going to train a bunch of lifeguards. They're going to teach everyone in the village CPR, and they're going to build some watchtowers so that they can really get a good picture of all the people that are falling into this river. So they get to work and they save a ton of lives, but they are not able to save every life, right? And so one day she gets this idea. She starts walking upstream, and everyone's shouting at her, where are you going? We need you. You can't leave us. And she says, well, I'm not leaving. I'm just going upstream to see why people are falling in the river in the first place, right? So the moral of the story is that by walking upstream, she's able to identify what is causing this crisis to happen. Why are people falling in the river, right? It is helpful to train people to jump into the river and to do CPR, but it's also really important that we're trying to understand the root cause of this crisis. And so if you want to move forward, it really helps us to sort of take a look at prevention efforts and understand what can we do to address these public health issues that are occurring later in life for folks. And so when we focus upstream, what we're actually doing is we are building skills, tools, and resilience, and building capacity to provide support for healthy help-seeking behavior, right? So when we hear a lot of times about suicide prevention efforts, what we're really hearing about is suicide intervention efforts. So to give some more context to that, we have a bunch of trainings that we provide for organizations, hospitals, schools that talk about risk identification and warning signs, and what to do if somebody does say that they're thinking about suicide, right? Which is so important. We need those people. We need those efforts. But we also want to go upstream so that we can really hopefully prevent people from falling into the river in the first place, or equipping them with the skills that they need to navigate those rough waters if they do fall into the river, right? When we are using an upstream method, especially when we're working with youth, it is incredibly important that we involve youth in this process. So I have a little activity that I would like to chat with you all about. If you want to go forward, Christy. So Christy's going to pull up a word cloud. I really want to get some perspective from you all about why you think it's important for youth to be involved in this effort. So I said answer the question in 1 to 2 words, but if you look at the bottom, you'll see that if you hyphen the words or just type it in one big word, then you should be okay. So if it's more than 1 to 2 words, just make sure you put a hyphen so that it can stay cohesive. You do not have to enter your name. And I believe the link for the word cloud is in the chat. Thank you, Melissa. Let me move my screen around so I can see it better. Buy-in, normalize, trust, human life. Kids know other kids' thoughts. Yeah. Use good language. We are old. Yes, very true. I love that answer. I love watching these things grow. Peer-driven, stigma, different perspective. Self-recognizing mental health issues. Yeah. Relatable. Authenticity, big time. Someone has added transparency into the chat, which absolutely. All right. Oh, I was just about to say, it seems like it's kind of dying down here. Empowering. Yeah. Aren't folks more likely to buy into something if they feel empowered, right? Absolutely. Yeah, so you all are really hitting the nail on the head here. Kids absolutely do understand and identify more with their peers than they do with adults. Even adults who work with youth, right, or who work really well with youth, it is still so important that kids be brought into the conversation. And this is really important, not just in suicide prevention, but prevention across the board. What we know is that youth are less likely to tune in and pay close attention if adults are standing in front of them lecturing, right? When kids are in front of kids, or what I like to say is youth voices need youth, or youth ears need youth voices, right? It sits differently. If you want to go ahead, are we going to get to save this word cloud? Perfect. Okay. All right, so this can be sort of a controversial concept, specifically surrounding suicide prevention and mental health, right? Can kids really talk about mental health with each other in a safe way? What do you all think? I'm curious. Do you think that we can engage youth in the conversation about suicide prevention and mental health in safe and productive ways? Yeah, so we're getting some yeses. What we know is that kids are going to have these conversations anyway, right? And so if we can meet them where they're at and equip them with the skills and the knowledge to support their peers and to connect to ongoing support and help, that is the most effective prevention that we can do. So a lot of times we hear parents especially have concerns about talking about mental health and suicide because they don't want to put any ideas in the student's head. Have any of you heard that before? If I ask my student or my child about suicide, then it's going to give them that idea. Yeah, all the time. Yeah. How do you all generally respond to that? Feel free to unmute, whatever is most comfortable for you all. I'd be curious to hear how you all are handling that conversation with parents, because I think sometimes that can be a really tricky component of working with youth, is navigating those relationships with the parents.
Meg, just to catch you up as our friends are thinking about kind of their responses to that question you just posed, seems a pretty unilateral yes in the chat in terms of can we engage youth in these conversations, and also that they've had the experience around some concerns. And Lydia just shared that suicide is already all around many of these kids. We want to give them a safe way to talk and think about it.
I love that answer. Yeah. Yeah, because we know that they are having these conversations. Several years ago, my workplace did some surveys in a local school. They were doing some social emotional skill development and learning to, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. Like I said I would, so I'm going to close it. To really gauge and work with students in a fifth grade level, right? And we were trying to gain an understanding of how much do kids know about suicide? How much are we avoiding that topic around them because we think that it's dangerous? And what we found was that nearly every single student in that fifth grade classroom had heard the word suicide and knew what it meant. And about half of them had known somebody who died by suicide in fifth grade, right? So these are not new topics to students, especially older students. We know that there are conversations happening, things being posted online, right, that really show that students know about suicide and mental health issues earlier and earlier. So when we talk about upstream prevention, we're talking about meeting them where they're at in that moment, right? And making sure that they know it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to not be okay. And there are things we can do to get better and to recover. So we already saw through the word cloud that that involving youth in suicide prevention is meaningful for a number of reasons, right? Most notably that they relate to one another. Students have a better understanding of what's happening in their school, in their classrooms, in their peer groups. They're more likely to have that authentic connection, right? So I work in a lot of high school classrooms talking to teenagers specifically about suicide and about what it looks like to ask for help. And the common themes that I hear are, I don't want to talk to my parents about my mental health because they will freak out. I don't want to talk to my parents about my mental health or suicide because they won't believe me. They won't take me seriously, right? They'll say I'm just looking for attention. And if you were here for the kickoff webinar for this ECHO series, you know that people who are looking for attention probably need that attention, right? So even if your student is looking for attention, they still need that support. So they feel like their peers will believe them and take them seriously, right? I know that was true for me. I was a 16-year-old whose best friend was suicidal. Did I share this in the webinar series? Okay. I was a 15-year-old whose best friend was suicidal. And she asked me not to tell anyone. And so I didn't because I did not know any better at the time. And then she attempted suicide. and she survived. We work together today and we talk about this all the time. But that was an incredibly scary experience for the both of us, right? And really isolating, actually. And so we like to share that story with students because it's true. It really happened to us and it was really scary. And when we get to share that with students, they tend to open up, right? And they're like, well, what if my friend feels betrayed, right? What if my friend tells me that they're suicidal and they ask me not to tell anyone, but I do, and then they're going to be mad at me, right? Sometimes people will say, well, wouldn't you rather have a friend who is alive and mad at you than a friend who passes away, right? And that's a pretty like intense statement to say to a child, but I think it does demonstrate that keeping this secret is not okay. It's not safe. What we really need to do is connect this student to support. And it's likely that they won't stay mad at you once they've reached a point of recovery or getting the help that they need. When we're working with youth around suicide and mental health or prevention in general, it's really important that we know that they have knowledge of the resources that are available in that particular community, in that particular school. That is one of the most important components. Yes, we want students to know how to listen. We want students to know how to ask about suicide. The most important thing is that students know how to connect with an adult who will take them seriously. And so one thing that I've noticed that's really, really helpful is when we're super transparent about that. So instead of saying, you have to find an adult, you have to tell an adult about your friend that's struggling, right? We're going to say, I know you would rather talk to each other. Is that true? Right? Get some buy-in. Yes, that's true. What we know is that this is a really big deal. It's a lot of pressure to keep this kind of secret, and it's not okay to do that, right? What we really want you to do is reach out to an adult that makes you and your friend feel safe, seen, heard, supported, right? And that can look like any adult that's older than you. It doesn't just have to be your parent. I think a lot of times the hesitation around that piece is like confiding in parents, right? So just express, it doesn't have to be your parents. It can be a whole number of adults, right? Your teachers, your coaches, your youth group leaders, your school counselor, your therapist, right? Like there are so many adults. You are bound to have one in your life that you can confide in. And if not, right, I can be that person for you. I will believe you. I will take you seriously. And then we want to really emphasize you should not be the only person to know about somebody else's thoughts of suicide, including your own. You don't have to go through this alone. All right, go ahead and progress us forward. So I wanted to share about sources of strength. I'm curious, let me move my screen around here so I can see your faces. Let me know in some way, whether it's a physical thumbs up or a reaction, if you have heard of sources of strength. Okay, so not many of us. Okay, there's some people in the chat speaking up. Cool. All right, so for those of you who are familiar with sources of strength, I'm curious how you're familiar. Is it something that you're involved in or that your community is involved in? Is it just something you happen to know about? A previous training? Do we have any sources of strength adult advisors in this training? Okay. So sources of strength, the reason I choose to talk about this program in particular is because, well, I am a trainer for sources of strength, so I'm very familiar with the program, but it is an evidence-based suicide prevention program. In the world of suicide prevention, we don't have a lot of opportunity for evidence-based programming. And so when there is an evidence-based program or approach, we feel very passionate about it. And what we know is that Sources of Strength is an upstream prevention program. So it really fits in nicely with what we're talking about today. And the reason I'm talking about it is to just provide perspective and to provide an opportunity to hear about upstream prevention in action, right? It's one thing to talk about what upstream prevention is, but it's also important to understand that there really are programs that fall into this category that can improve the culture of your community or school. So the way that this program works is it is built around this wheel that you see here that has all these beautiful colors on it. And all of these things that are listed are considered the sources of strength. In the prevention world, we also call them protective factors. So these are things, places, people in our lives that give us strength, that make us feel connected, that give us hope, right? All of these kind of positive feelings or interactions. The program isn't that kind of toxic positive approach, right? With the choose happy or choose joy, right? It's more focused on using the strengths that we have available to us, right? Because not every person has, for example, on this wheel, a mentor that they feel like they can go to, but they do have access to other strengths in their lives. And so the really beautiful thing about this wheel is that students can use it as a tool to check in with themselves. So when a school goes through a Sources of Strength training, they are taught, the training includes how to identify if your peers are struggling. It also talks about how to engage your peers, your friends, yourself in these strengths to help mitigate or navigate crisis situations. And ultimately, the goal is to prevent it. So what we know is that students who are involved in Sources of Strength are 4 times more likely to reach out to a safe adult if they or their friend are struggling. 4 times more likely. That's huge, right? Because we just spent a whole lot of time talking about how kids really prefer to talk to each other. And so anything we can do to bolster that youth adult connection, right, is going to be something that ultimately saves lives. They see that schools who implement programs such as Sources of Strength not only impact the students who are involved in the program, but also the entire student body. So to give an example, there was a school who did a project where they set up booths around the school and allowed students throughout a week's time to go up and fill out a strip of paper. So it was just a strip of colorful paper, and they got to put what gives them hope or what gives them strength on that strip of paper. And then the Sources of Strength group took it back to their group meeting, and they made those little paper chains, right? Do you all know what I'm talking about? The old classic paper chain. And they put them all together and hung them around the school. And they had so much involvement that it was able to fill up the entire commons area. And the school administration and teachers had noticed a shift in the school culture to be more supportive. They noticed less bullying. They noticed that students were more supportive of one another. And it isn't this simple construction paper chains that made the difference, right? It was the action of doing that project all together and really talking about the things that give us strength that made the difference. So that's just a small example of how such a seemingly easy and simple project can make such a huge impact and have really nice outcomes for the students' mental health. Does anyone have any questions about Sources of Strength or upstream prevention before we move forward?
Meg, I'm wondering, and this is a question from me, not from the chat, but I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how a school district kind of can think about what they are currently doing in reference, or maybe using this framework of Sources of Strength. So I hear what you're saying in terms of an evidence-based program, that it has these different components. But if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, like this is a whole other thing, right? This is a whole kind of packaged effort. Immediately I'm thinking of like, what is the cost? How do we get training? Like all the things,
Yeah.
pieces. And so what would be a way to kind of start thinking about even existing efforts? Like, do you have some recommended questions or kind of some initial ways that you've seen schools successfully consider what they're already doing in this arena?
Totally. Yeah. I think that the really cool thing is that most of you all are already doing things that would kind of fall under this umbrella, which would also fall under that upstream prevention umbrella. So if you are a school who's like, oh, this sounds pretty cool, it is important to know that there is a cost associated with it. If you are interested in bringing a group like Sources of Strength in, you can reach out to me. I'm a local trainer, and so the cost would be much smaller than reaching out to that Sources of Strength national team. But if you're already working with youth groups that, like some schools have mental health clubs, some schools have like a speak up group, which is like a club that just promotes connection and anti-bullying and stuff like that. You can start implementing projects without implementing this whole big effort, right? So, however, if somebody is interested in sort of bolstering what their school is already doing, really what it takes is a very passionate champion from an adult to kind of get it started or get it moving. We have found that if the adult piece isn't there, then that peer leader or youth component isn't as strong. When we do trainings for Sources of Strength and we're working with the adult advisors, we really emphasize that this shouldn't be projects that the teachers or the advisors are taking on, right? Y'all are already doing a lot. You wear so many hats, and the goal really is to have it be peer led. So even if you're not doing a Sources of Strength group, but you have an existing group that's operating and doing projects that promote similar ideas, the youth should be the ones running that, right? You're there as an adult to make sure that the messages are safe, to make sure that you can connect them to resources, right? To be that kind of guiding light. But the pressure should not be put on the school staff or the teacher or whoever is involved in that group, because we want the youth to feel really empowered to take control. I don't know if I answered your question, Melissa.
No, I think you did, and it just makes me think about how, you know, if as someone working in a school or in a different context, you know, if I start globally and just kind of think, okay, what are we doing across the board in terms of suicide prevention? And then I'm going to start generating some ideas of either a policy we have in place or maybe like a standalone program. But then that second question of, and what are we doing that really involves youth voice, that is, you know, youth contributing to resources that then, you know, how youth are then benefiting, right? So for youth, by youth, with youth, get that kind of piece, which that then makes a lot of sense in terms of, you know, where really are we engaging youth in this process versus us doing something as the grown-ups for them or to them or about them, really emphasizing that with piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Christy, if you want to go to the next slide, I really want to hear from you all. What are some things happening in your communities or schools that are working towards prevention in some way? Are there projects or programs or clubs that you all have or see, or do you have questions about how to start one? We really want there to be time for robust discussion so that everyone has the chance to maybe explore some ideas or different perspectives. So please chime in and share any examples or ask any questions. Because like I said, y'all are already doing things. We want to hear about what those things are.
So Susan is sharing that they just had an amazing Kingman County Color Run for suicide awareness, and that they had over 550 runners and volunteers, which is pretty incredible. So Susan, thank you for sharing that.
That is absolutely outstanding. I'm curious about where was that born from? Was there a group that put that run on? Who hosted it? Sorry to put you on the spot, Susan.
If I may unmute myself, it might be easier.
Yeah,
Please do.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
We have a new Kingman County coalition, mental health coalition, that was started this summer, actually. It's a coalition between the hospital, the mental health services we have in Kingman County. It includes EMS, the schools, our health department, like I said, area daycares, our preschool. It kind of involves a representative from everybody.
Wow.
And, I'm not sure where they came up with the color run idea, because that was already going when I joined, but it absolutely wrapped up everyone in the whole county. And I think that's why, I mean, they were hoping for 200 people and got, like I said, well over 500. And it went off great. And just, there was tons of resources there at the event and after the event. And so I think it was amazing. And this mental health coalition, we're getting ready to have a meeting next week. And it's been a great source of these kinds of ideas.
I mean, that is just absolutely incredible, and shows that people are really passionate about this topic, right? Like, y'all just started this coalition in the summer and already had a huge event that involved over 500 people. Yeah, people are really craving this type of thing.
And if I may, here's why I think it was so successful, because it was mixing something serious with something joyful.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, throwing powder at people, running, exercise outside. There were, snacks. I mean, I think that's important to just remember that whatever you're doing, I mean, mix it with something joyful, because it's about prevention as well. And
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, we try to bring in our trainings a lot of like fun into it, right? Like, yes, we're talking about a really serious, important, heavy topic, but we're also together, right? Connecting and doing this because we care. And like, that should be celebrated and acknowledged. So I am a big fan of adding that fun, joyful component in. And I think that's especially important when we're talking with youth, right? Like, anytime we do a youth program or youth training, we're always including some sort of really silly game that has nothing to do with mental health and nothing to do with suicide prevention, right? Just to let the kids have fun and for them to see the adults being silly and engaging in that way.
And if I may, I mean, it was just heartwarming, because our local football team played a game far away. So I'm imagining they didn't even get home till midnight Friday night. It's Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m. They're there ready to volunteer and throw powder as a team building experience also. But so it was really amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like it was really kind of woven in through the whole community, and it wasn't just one kind of group showing up.
Yep.
That's really wonderful. Yeah, y'all, we'd love to hear what you're already doing. One, because it's really nice to be able to brag on yourselves a little bit from time to time, right? But also we can learn and grow from hearing each other's experiences as well. I would never have thought to do a color run for suicide prevention, right? And so please feel free to share what you all are working on or doing.
Meg, I'm wondering too, and Susan, I appreciate the example you shared, and again, that reminder that even when we start thinking about prevention, a lot of times, so preventing what?
I do
that. That a lot of times when we get to the prevention stage, even though that's upstream, that we've already defined the thing we're preventing. So suicide prevention, substance use prevention, but really even stepping back further around this awareness component, and that can be a huge part of it too, right? And so I'm wondering how, from your perspective, we can think about like mental health literacy and mental health promotion and just kind of this basic level of understanding, and knowing that in that very broad continuum, where we have mental health and well-being and thriving on one side, and then all the way over to mental illness and sickness and really struggling, kind of how we can think about that. Because I'm guessing that there were friends who were at the color run that it was very specific around suicide, right? And that it was something that has touched their lives, and that maybe it was kind of more mental health related in general, that, this is an opportunity to highlight, that mental illness happens and mental health challenges happen and suicide unfortunately happens. So curious to hear what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I think that the way that I really try to approach the whole picture, right, and not just the suicide prevention piece, is this idea of there being shared risk and protective factors, right? So where there is risk factors, there's inevitably protective factors, but we also look at risk factors or warning signs for suicide, and we see warning signs and risk for so many other things, right? Substance misuse disorders, or mental health conditions, or PTSD, right? Like all of these things kind of culminate under this shared risk and protective factor umbrella. And so when you're putting on an event or planning a program, yes, it may be specific to one thing, but inevitably you are addressing those other issues that lead up to a suicide crisis as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I think, one of the pieces that I've tried to emphasize, even when I'm talking to some, to friends who perhaps are not in schools, and we talk about kind of what are schools doing in terms of suicide prevention. And I'm always very quick to remind folks that suicide prevention, every school is doing suicide prevention. Schools are consistently a safe space where young people show up, and there are trusted adults who are going to act in consistent and predictable ways. And that itself is suicide prevention, right? So even just kind of in these day-to-day pieces, and then also anything that promotes protective factors. So mentoring programs are, at its base, promoting protective factors, which therefore means that's suicide prevention. Anything that helps the grownups in a context work together better and feel safe asking hard questions and challenging one another and asking for help is suicide prevention, right? And so then all of a sudden it helps us really expand that perspective. And I love what you said about making sure that we're balancing the risk factor side with the protective factor. So it's easy, especially around suicide or these really, really scary kinds of crises, that we get stuck on the risk factor warning sign, because that's what our brains are going to, right? So kind of flashing red lights, let me read the warning signs because I want to keep people safe. And that's naturally where our brains are going to go. But then having that reminder of like, and what are all the things that we're already doing to keep kids safe?
Totally.
Okay, so now we're on this side. And then, again, it's always easier to build on successes than it is to try to start something totally kind of fresh and new. So I appreciate what you're saying there. And it looks like a friend here posted in the chat. So I'm just going to read, I think it's Amika. I work for a group home for girls, and when we talk about suicide and prevention, we always let the girls talk about what they know and have possibly experienced, and then we focus on the environment that we as staff hope we are creating, so that the girls feel free to talk to at least one staff member about how they are truly feeling. If we know a resident is not fond of a staff member, then we try not to include them in that conversation, because we want them to know that we hear them and that they want them to feel comfortable and to not be ashamed of their feelings. So I love the personal connection piece of that, but again, looking for, the strengths and where the relationships are, right? And that's the beauty of working in a school or a different kind of context where you do have more than one grown-up, is that the best news is that no one single adult has to be everything for all kids. Yeah. But as long as you are as much as you can be for someone else, then collectively it'll work. And so absolutely finding where the relationships exist and trying to build on that. But Meg, wasn't sure if you had other thoughts or reactions to Amika's comment here.
I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head, Melissa. It's like you're a mental health professional or something, you know? Yeah, I just agree with everything you said.
Well, that's the best response. I think I just want you around all the time, Meg. What do you think? I just agree with everything you said. Okay.
What do other folks think, or does anyone have any other examples or questions or anything?
Or also throwing out there, if folks have had challenges that they've faced in trying to move the needle forward, even just a little bit around prevention. And I know that I'm sure Meg experiences a lot of these barriers, but if there's something either that you're currently struggling with, or you kind of see it coming down the road of this hasn't happened yet, but we know it's coming, of kind of the suicide prevention opportunities and challenge. Do folks have thoughts or questions?
I will say that
What were you going to add, Meg?
sorry, I got distracted. One of the challenges that we hear frequently from adults who are trying to really start some sort of prevention effort in the school is that they're having a hard time getting buy-in. And one of the things that I think consistently we've seen be beneficial to these barriers is, like we've been talking about this whole time, like, how are youth advocating for this particular thing, right? So school board needs to meet to discuss something. Which youth are going to show up to advocate for this program, right? When the youth voices are in the room, there tends to be a different response. So any challenges like that or others that may have been popping up?
Here's the challenge, friends. As mental health professionals, we have a remarkable wait time. Thank you, Susan. I think something we always struggle with as a school is empowering adults in the building to have the confidence to lead these intense discussions with kids. Many feel like the counselors are the one who should lead these groups, not them. I teach biology, not mental health. So that shift in training for the adults is also a challenge. People are afraid to say the wrong thing, so they say nothing. Oh, Susan, that is so beautifully said. And I absolutely reflects my experience with, you know, folks not entirely knowing what their space is, and kind of where their line is. And so they don't want, you know, you don't want to start the conversation if you don't know what to do. As it continues, we don't want to ask questions if we don't know what to do with the answer. And so we just don't. And then we know that we should be doing something else, but sometimes maybe don't know what that is. Meg, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think my initial responses to the many feel like counselors are the ones who should lead these groups, not them. We hear that a lot in our work, right? Well, it's really the business of mental health professionals to deal with this. But to that we respond, suicide prevention really is everybody's business, right? Because teachers, mental health staff at schools, administrators are the ones that are interacting with youth every single day, right? For multiple hours a day. And so it's really important that folks really do, that folks be equipped with the skills to be able to have those conversations. And the real like plot twist is that there's no right way to have those conversations, right? It's more important to have the conversation into to shift to thinking about strength and protective factors than to not have the conversation at all. Parents not to be dismissive of a teen's suicidal ideation.
And Meg, if I can just hop in, I completely agree with what you're saying there, and I do feel like that oftentimes, and I can't speak for what anyone else is feeling, but sometimes that it's not resistance, but maybe just hesitancy, that really comes from a place of fear and uncertainty, not a place of I don't care about kids, I don't care if this happens. Like it that, I really do positive assumptions, right? So folks who work in education and mental health and in the worlds that you all are in, you're not showing up for the paycheck. So you're showing up for something else, and that's because you have big hearts, right? And you want to give and support. And so I think what I try to reframe it as is it's not a matter of if, but when this conversation happens. And it will happen if it hasn't. And so when it happens with it's someone in your family or your own child or your neighbor or in your school, or it will happen. And then when it happens, you want to be able to know how to respond. And so better to know now and when it's not in the moment so that you can, practice what you say and have those components then waiting because it is going to happen. It will happen. So what are you going to say? And what are you going to do when it does happen? We feel prepared. We feel so much more confident in how we could act and how we should act.
So true. I think that like school Jason Flat trainings could be a great opportunity to sort of start really equipping the teachers specifically on how to have those conversations. And it doesn't have to be like, we're going to use all of class time to talk about suicide today, right? But more of those like tiny, minute interactions that happen just on a regular basis, right? Great place to start.
Yeah, and I know that we're getting close to time here, Meg, but just some great comments in the chat. So being present, knowing that you are an adult and that you're there to be a positive source of trust and safety, which is fantastic. And then also just revisiting, and you mentioned it, but the comment from earlier, and we might at this point, Meg, think about sort of helping our friends here know what is to come in future conversations, but how to field and to respond to even with more nuance, perhaps this is attention seeking. This is how do we take it? How do we acknowledge and validate when folks are expressing any kind of suicidal ideation, and how do we make sense of that? That's something that Sarah is sharing that she struggles with.
Yeah, totally. I think that all of those things are topics that will be covered in future echoes, right? Like assessment and screening and how to respond and those kinds of things, I think will be covered going forward. Are there other slides that I am to? Okay. I will put my email here in the chat. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if I left something kind of out in the air and you're like, what? She didn't finish this thought. Please reach out to me. I want to make sure that you all have what you need. I think that for today, the key takeaways are that upstream prevention efforts are implemented early on in a youth's life. This type of prevention approach aims to reduce the chances of a crisis developing in the first place. Youth must have a seat at the table, at the prevention table, if we want to reach other youth in an authentic way. And then based on a foundation of trauma-informed best practices and healthy lifestyle mindset, there is a growing number of evidence-based suicide prevention and intervention strategies to address the multifactorial pathways.
And I think, Meg, just to add, and Corey just had a terrific comment, this idea that when friends are struggling, that oftentimes they just need you to listen, not to have the answers. And that when you go into a conversation with that in mind, that's a different way to approach it, that oftentimes we really do just need someone to listen. We don't expect other people to have all the answers. And I don't think young people expect other people to have all the answers either.
No. Yeah, take that pressure off of yourselves. It's just not even possible to have all of the answers. Thank you all so much for joining today. It means a lot that you log on in your lunch hour and you stay. It it shows that you all really care and are passionate. So the next session will be on Tuesday, October 4th, again from 12 to 1. The slides and other materials will be sent to your email along with certificates of completion. And feel free to reach out to Telehealth ROCKS if you have any follow-up questions and or comments.